Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Some big news coming in today about the Ukraine war. It seems that the United States is pushing Ukraine to kind of get inside and start keep an open mind for negotiations. Interesting development suddenly, as a matter of fact. Here was a narrative which was telling everybody that, boss, Ukraine is going to win tomorrow. What happened? How is it that the entire narrative has suddenly changed? Is it just the elections, like a lot of us predict, or is it elections and a lot more which is going into the plate, which is resulting in the West kind of shaking up in terms of its support for Ukraine? I'd like to sit down and analyze a lot of these things. But before I get into the video, guys, as usual, I request all of you, please like this video. It helps me reach a larger audience by helping me across with the YouTube algorithm. Second, check your subscriptions, hit the bell icon. Third, if you can, please do contribute towards the Dev Talks efforts by joining in as a member or sending me a super sticker or super chat. You can also directly contribute towards Dev Talks with the UPI number mentioned below. Do visit my website. I'm sorry, I think the weather here is a bit bad. Anyways, let's get into this subject. It's an interesting news that came across. Washington Post kind of broke this news in the morning, and since then, it's not been discussed that much. There has to be a reason for it, and let's get into it. But before I get into that, a historical fact: Kiev, as a part of the erstwhile Soviet Union, was liberated from the German forces on this particular day in 1943. So it's a pretty significant day for the history of that entire region. Now, the promise that the US had given Ukraine is of tacit support until the complete destruction and defeat of Russia. Today, we get a report that USA is secretly asking Ukraine to begin negotiations. One has to wonder what happened, right? There has to be something that has happened which either the US has realized right now, or it's a combination of events. Let's look at these events separately. One of the biggest things that I can think of right now is, and a lot of governments do this, is put out a news and see what reaction comes out of it. Right? It's called feedback measuring. You can, gauge the public sentiment as to if people are for it, against it. You're getting feedback, people are talking about it, people make shows about it. Talk shows, articles will be written, and this and that and the other. So you get a lot of feedback as to the mood of the public. Right? Now, interestingly, this particular article has been picked up and it has been spread across all over the world. Everybody's kind of covered it, but not much of discussion is being seen across in terms of the spoken media. So that's an interesting this thing. Now, since the war has begun, the unlimited sort of a support that has been given to Ukraine, it is basically looking. When you analyze the numbers today, you kind of see that there is a certain reduction, right? We had the 40 billion figure, then we had the 12 billion figure, and then 2 billion figure, and then 2 billion figure, and then 1 billion figure, and this and that and the other. Came from all over the place, came from Germany, came from France, came from various different places. Of course, German contribution has been very little, different subject. So it came from all over the place. Today we see the aid which is going out is in $100 million range. It's gone from the B to the M, right? It was billions and now it is millions. So we see a package of $275 million, $175 million, something or the other every month. It is coming across. Every 15-20 days, something is coming across. So the total amount that is going to Ukraine in terms of aid and stuff like that has drastically reduced. As a matter of fact, the figure that everybody likes to point a finger at, shoot at the Americans, is that, you guys have given 40-60 billion dollars and this and that. Although that money was basically spent up within the American defense industry to start up and start producing weapons to replace the reserves that the Americans had already given to Ukraine. So it's not that the entire amount has gone. Some people actually gauge this amount to be at about 18 or 20 billion dollars, which is the figure where for the amount of weapons that have gone to Ukraine. So that's something that let's understand. Now, in the beginning of the war, if you remember, there was a meeting where I think Lloyd Austin, your Tony Blinken, and all these guys had gone and met, of course, Zelensky, where there was a statement that was put out by Lloyd Austin, and he said that the objective of the Western alliance is to damage Russia so much so that it cannot carry out these kind of invasions again. Interesting, very hardline statement, and that has been kept by most analysts as the main objective of the Western alliance. Right? Put a lot of damage into Russia, make sure that they lose a lot of soldiers and this and that, so that there's a backlash of some sort which comes across toward from the Russian army and the Russian people. Jens Stoltenberg, who's the head of, who's the Secretary General of NATO, also mentioned a couple of weeks ago that NATO cannot lose in Ukraine, right? That cannot happen, because if Ukraine's loss in this particular war would be a loss for NATO itself. Now that is interesting because Ukraine is neither a part of NATO nor anything else. So Ukraine's loss is being directly connected by Jens Stoltenberg as the loss of NATO. Why am I telling you all this stuff? That gives you just a refresher on the kind of narrative, the kind of support, the kind of words that have been talked about, the kind of statements that have been given, and the kind of commitment that has been put across by the West towards this effort in Ukraine. Now let's look at what happened with Russia. The narrative that the Western powers came up with in terms of the sanctions with Russia was that it's designed to hurt the Russian people, right? They were supposed to basically, if you remember the dialogue of President Biden, he had said that I will turn the ruble into rubble. Now, when something like that will happen in any country, hyperinflation is obviously going to hurt the Russian people quite a bit in terms of their finances, living standards, and whole lot of other things. When this sort of a thing happens, there are shortages, over a whole lot of the entire country kind of gets shaken up. This was combined with personal attacks. Now, Putin, I'm sure all of you have seen the memes with the small mustache of Putin here. You've seen the memes where, blood and this and that, and a whole lot of, I think they hired a very good social media company who went berserk in terms of getting photographs and putting videos and bombing the entire world with a particular narrative. Now, these are personal attacks on the leadership as well as the armed forces, with the accusations that came out, which have not been investigated as of now, of Bucha, of various other, war crimes that the Russians allegedly have committed. Now, have they or haven't they, something that only an investigation can tell you. But, this is what the narrative was. And basically what I'm trying to get at is that the Russians were portrayed to be the reincarnation of the devil himself. No one else, right up to the devil. And, it is khatam, right? So this is, of course, resulted in a big, big thing. And this is the first time when the Russians and the Americans actually spoke together was during this dirty bomb nonsense that actually happened when Shoigu, who's the defense minister of Russia, picked up the phone and spoke to Lord Austin and, kind of warned them or put the information out that please tell Ukraine not to do this. This was the first communication that actually happened. Now, this whole, creation of a devil sort of a narrative for the leadership cut off the entire communication. Certain leaders were talking, but it was not constructive. Right? A complete ridicule. Now, Americans, I'm sorry, I want to just step on this. There's something that we've realized again in this war is that the West believes, and Minister Jaishankar, EAM of India, had put out this, statement very clearly in a meeting where they said Europe and America, and Europe has to understand that, when other people have problems, they say it's not our problem. But when Europe has a problem, it becomes the world's problem. And that's something that the world has stopped kind of accepting. Now, he was talking about the Europeans. I would actually add the Americans in that, because you're either with us or against us. I think we've heard that so many times. Now, Russia has, of course, very genuine security concerns within the region, which has been voicing out since 2008, right? When President Putin put this out, and George Bush, I guess, was the president at that time, who said that, we will expand NATO with Ukraine and Georgia. After that, the Georgian war happened and Georgia got broken up. Those regions are still kind of in turmoil. And the Russians now in the last year, and I mentioned this in my previous videos also, had given a European security framework to the European Union and NATO on the 17th or 18th of December last year, which was obviously thrown into the trash basket. Now, when that happens, there is a certain misunderstanding that comes up, there's a certain distrust that comes up. The statements between Joe Biden and Putin when they met together was of reconciliation and working together. Body language was a whole different thing. But then things didn't really work out. Was it done purposefully or not? We all kind of know, and we've discussed this multiple times, so I really don't want to get into it. The whole phenomenon, again, was enunciated targeting the people of the world, right? A lot of, if you look at Indian social media, Twitter as well, you had a lot of people with these Ukraine little flags on their profiles, and a whole lot of that entire thing went through as a fire through the general public in the world. As a matter of fact, they targeted everyone, including inside Russia. Now, media campaigns were basically designed to keep a focus on one side of the story. Ki bhai, and this was actually done by the West by banning RT and all Russian media sources. So you're just supposed to listen to the West, and that's it. So that's something that was actually done. One wondered a lot of times, and I have actually spoken about this again, and I wondered it quite a bit. I've written about this, that how could a campaign sustain itself, which is no more than statements of rhetoric. You're basically again and again targeting personalities. He's this, he's that, he's the devil, he's doing this without any proof. This was, in my opinion, designed to infuse a certain amount of fear, especially in the Europeans, because they were the front line in terms of this combat or this war. So if the European population was with you, again, a lot of the game would have been won, because again, the borders and this and that, and a lot of the support and arms and ammunition had to go through Europe. Poland seems to have bought into this particular narrative very, very hardcore, and we see them. I mean, one of the only European countries that, in my opinion, is gunning for a fight with Russia. They've got about 30 or 40,000 soldiers inside Ukraine in Ukrainian uniform right now, and this is something I can't prove. This is what a lot of reports are saying, right? This now, I want to say one thing is that when this report came out today morning, uh, I can only think about a factor that it was a little shocking to me, that how come something like this suddenly came out, and especially from the US. Of course, elections, yes, but till now, I mean, elections are what? Today is the 5th, they've got 3 days. Why change the entire narrative 3 days before the election? If they had to, they could have built it up about a month before, after the Ukrainian counteroffensive, kind of go out on a high. We won, we've got something. So it would have been a flowing narrative. Why right now? And of course, when something like this happens, it also sends a shockwave through the population that, boss, ye kya hua hai? From one extreme position of defeat Russia, devil, this, that, ye, wo, to suddenly a more centrist approach, ki bhai, no, let's kind of sort this out and all that stuff. It is also on the backdrop, by the way, I wanted to also tell you, President of European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, had done a press conference today where she presented, I think, a plan which 18 billion euros was supposed to be given to Ukraine. This was again not announced for a long time, because Europe kind of fears, there might be a public backlash. So there is two sides of the story everywhere, right? People will wonder what has happened and what exactly is going on. So that's something that these leaders are worried about, right? So the factor that the European president has not announced this package because of public backlash is a clear example that people are aware and they are fearing a certain public backlash. Now, my question again to the US is about putting this story right now. Don't they fear a kind of backlash during an election time? I mean, it's going to be a little hard election for them to put across if the Republicans literally pick up this particular point. Now, I would have believed that this whole centrist approach of kind of negotiations and this and that should have been done by the US to begin with. Of course, they couldn't have done it because they fueled the entire problem. But anyways, as a great power, it would have been nice to see the US get into this position right at the beginning. That guy is okay, calm down, little. Let's kind of talk it out and all that stuff. Now, this is not the first time that negotiations are happening, right? Negotiations happened in April and May, March and April, I believe. Turkey was helping it out. That happened in Minsk and Istanbul and this and that. They were about to get into a kind of a deal. President Zelensky had agreed on negotiations. He had agreed on Crimea, sort of a thing, and then he had agreed for autonomy for the Russians and not joining NATO, declaring neutrality, and all that stuff. Now, all that I think would have been given to the big daddies in the West, and we saw Boris Johnson. Now, this is confirmed by an article that came out in the Guardian itself. Boris Johnson flew down to Ukraine and told President Zelensky, hold on, don't do this. The Western countries, or the collective West, will not support you with this decision. He assured Zelensky that, whatever you need in terms of arms and ammunition, and, to entice someone at that time was given everything. We will give it to you to the bitter end and we will stand. And, Boris Johnson, when he talks, it's like, it's like a nice show to watch. He gets very excited about the whole thing. Now, this is what was done. So basically, this entire negotiation was derailed, and Zelensky backed off, and then rest is history. The Russians went back from Kiev, thinking that they would do a goodwill gesture to move the negotiation forward, and then the entire thing just hit the fan. The Russian basically now what they have done is that mobilization has happened. I believe 320,000 soldiers have joined in. About 82,000 soldiers have already been deployed. They've been, their units have been reinforced wherever losses or injuries and all that stuff has happened. They've done this referendum where these 4 regions are now in the fold of Mother Russia, as per se. The Ukrainians, of course, carried out that big counter-offensive. Some amount of territory has been gained back. The Russians slowly in the northeast, towards Kharkiv, has been pushing slowly forward, and they've taken back quite a lot of region from the Ukrainians. The main fight seems to be happening in the Kherson region. Now, that's where another thing is that till some time ago, the Americans were pushing. Now, I want to talk about the ground situation is because of this Kherson region. The Americans were literally pushing the Ukrainians, and even are right now, as per reports that have come out, that to conduct a counter-offensive before the midterm elections. Now, it's 3 days. Even if the counter-offensive starts today, it's going to be, before it actually yields some result, it's going to be a long time. And by the looks of it, the Russians have actually kind of put forward a lot of, they've dug in, okay, to be very simple. Of course, the Ukrainians have also tried out their hand in cutting the water and electricity of that particular region. There was a big conspiracy theory that the flag was taken off, Russian flag was taken out of the main buildings, and the Russians have run away and this and that. So a whole lot of stuff happened. Kherson seems to be the area of focus right now. So it's a little weird to me that on one hand, the West is planning a counter-offensive with the West, with the Ukrainians. And again, this has been put out and clarified by CNN. I think it was an article written on somewhere in the beginning of September, where CNN had said that US does war game these offensives with the Ukrainians to ensure that all the things are kind of put in place. Interestingly, about this US, they've told the Ukrainians, "Bhai, you start negotiating," but legally speaking, Ukrainian president can't do that. Now, I don't know how many of you would remember that the Ukrainian president had passed a law in their parliament saying that till the time Russia has a president, President Putin is the president of Russia, they will not be negotiating with the Russians. So it's by law, the Ukrainian president cannot sit in the same room and negotiate with him. So they're short of calling Russia a terrorist state and this and that, which has also been done by a couple of European governments. Now, so that's a big kind of legal nick that he'll have to deal with. Of course, he can pass another law, but what will be the backlash within Ukraine is something that they'll have to look at. Now, Ukraine is not a very clear society. We know the problems within Ukraine, the nationalism and the extremism, which is their nationalism is great, but tilted nationalism, we all know what that comes to. The extremism there, I'm not using those words because, of course, at the end of it, I can't, being on YouTube. So there is that particular issue which is there. Now, how will that particular cabal, if I may use that word, react to this statement from the Americans. The arrogance that the Ukrainians have showed till now is that anybody who speaks against them is. We saw the reactions and the polite responses that the Ukrainian diplomats gave to Elon Musk when he gave that sort of that he put out the tweet. It was all F this and F that and yay, wo, and all that stuff. Do your job, just settlers that this thing. You're not supposed to talk, and a whole lot of things were said to him. So it's the arrogance. And I want to put this across as another news that there was a report that came out. Now, I don't know if it's a rumor or reality, but I'm kind of forced to believe that it was reality where President Joe Biden had given a mouthful to Zelensky because he was kind of asking too much and too many times. So there was a bit of a that happened somewhere at the end of May or June or something like that. Now, coming back to my discussion about this, we've discussed the ground situation. Now, war itself, the narrative of war is like a living being. This is something that we need to understand. And I've written about it, right? How a narrative, misguided narrative can actually create more problems for you than advantages. So narratives are supposed to build a perception of advantage for yourself. Now, as I said, wars are like living beings. Narratives are like living beings. If you don't keep feeding it, right, you have to give it regular food and it has to give out regular produce. If it's not doing that, it becomes stale and it becomes old and it dies. It will not be able to survive. Now, so what you do is you keep creating kind of situations and to keep that perception alive, keep the people's Ukrainian flags here and on the profiles and so on and so forth. Sometimes these things are backed up by some daring attacks, like we saw the ones that have been done, Nord Stream, this, that, it creates a whole narrative of success for the Ukrainians. But one little problem with this whole narrative war is that these narratives are like Twitter trends. They go up, they stay for a little bit, and they come back down. It doesn't stay up. It's not a constant. So if you can build up a particular narrative, create a whole tamasha, it doesn't stay up that long. And I think these are the lessons that the Americans and the Western powers are beginning to learn, that these are the main drawbacks. Let me tell you, okay, fine, they were supplying weapons and this and that and the other. It is the narrative and the changing narrative and the arrogance of that narrative which is making them today change that decision. Of course, politics and this and that. So I'm trying to substantiate that point with a certain number of things. So let's come back to this. You have to keep on creating incidents to keep that narrative on. Right? Now, today what has happened is, because of these narratives which have been based on a lot of fake news, a lot of stories and myths. I mean, we remember an American general putting out sort of a war scene that came out of an air battle scene that came out of a video game, and that's been done quite a bit, right? So what has happened is the global South, that includes India and all these other countries around. Of course, I'm going to just name India, have begun to question, like, yeah, what is happening? Why? These questions, of course, are not being asked they are being asked in America today, but previously that was not the case. India, we've been questioning the entire narrative from day one. Now, a lot of the population and a lot of the analysts within this country, I'd be honored if I'm placed at one of them in a very small level at my own little corner, have been able to do some analysis and put out the right or the narrative that they feel is right with whatever details that they find. Now, that is coming out to be a little bit of a problem for them, because the Western powers, to a large extent, would have hoped for a unilateral approach. By Russia has attacked, everybody opposed, China nahi karega, and we will kick China after that. So that's how I think that they thought. And one of the reasons why they are very disappointed with India is that we didn't kind of stick by that line. And because of India didn't stick by that line, a lot of countries, no, this, that. And today we see Saudi going completely against the West. The Gulf countries are completely against, and they're very pissed off with the way that this damn thing has been going on. And we see them talking about it very, very openly. The biggest problem that I'm going to mention right now is the personal capital of each one of these leaders. See, in the beginning, I told you this war has been made into a personal war between leaders. Putin. I mean, of course, their name is Russian Federation, Russia. I mean, Putin. When we talk about the United States, we don't keep on mentioning Biden or Trump. Yes, we do mention when they are in question. but we don't say that, the US is. We didn't say that Biden ran away. Biden left Afghanistan. It's always US troops withdrew from Afghanistan. But in this case, it was always Putin, 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 Putin. And the narrative, of course, during Boris Johnson's time was very, very hard. Now, a lot of the personal capital of these leaders have been involved. Yeah. Now, if you've called a guy a devil, how are you supposed to stand there and, you know, sit there with the same guy in the same room and talk to him? Right, of course, this backed up by a lot of protests that have started up. So the public have in the European Union and some places in the United States, we saw some examples of Obama being heckled pretty badly, as a matter of fact, in one of these democratic conventions. Uh, Protests have come up, governments have fallen, and as a matter of fact, just before I sat down for this, I saw an update which said that the French president is thinking about dissolving the French parliament. He's sitting on a not a very friendly course as far as his majority. These are a minority government, if I may put it that way. Now, the midterm elections, which is the point that I want to talk about, which is the most important critical thing, is that the midterm elections have also created a divide within the country, right? If Obama could have been heckled the way he was, of course, this feeling and this sense is there in a lot many people. There are multiple analysts who are talking about it, who've spoken about it very openly, that this is what you're doing is wrong, this is this is that, and they've been shadow banned. A very, very simple remove off Twitter, his accounts will be frozen, there's that, he will lose all his writing credibilities, and all that stuff used to happen. But the voices are still coming out. And this political divide which is building up in the US, which was enunciated by this poll that was taken by, I think, the Washington Post or the Washington Journal or the Wall Street Journal, one of these. This thing, I'm sorry, I'm kind of forgetting that, which mentioned 50% of the Republicans in political positions today were not willing to carry out this whole, blind support of Ukraine. Again, there was a congresswoman whose video was going viral in the morning, and I put it on the Dev Talks groups also, where she said that, not a single penny will go. Now, till now, what we saw was a bipartisan support towards um, Ukraine. Of course, Mitch McConnell and all these guys were for Ukraine, and that's how. As a matter of fact, the Biden administration had asked for about 37 billion. The Congress made it 40. So when it went through Congress, it's actually gone up. So there was a bipartisan support that was brought up. I would rather believe that the whole incident with Tulsi Gabbard, and of course the letter that was put across by the 30 Democrats who were made to withdraw it, by the way, within 24 hours, you can imagine the kind of force and threat that they would have gone through. This letter created a question. Tulsi Gabbard came out and said that, boss, you guys are warmongers and this and that and the other. Now, there's also another political twist to it, that the minority leader changes in December. And the new guy is called McCarthy, if I'm not mistaken, and he is supposed to be against this entire game. Now, what the Democrats are trying to do, if we are not able to stop this war and negotiations, guys, even if negotiations start, that doesn't mean the war will stop or there will be a ceasefire. A lot of times, actually, hard actions on the ground, offensives and heavy shelling and bombing is used as a pressure tactic during negotiations. So what the Democrats are trying to do right now is get some sort of a package released for the Ukrainians, so that December tak everything is kind of sorted out, and then they will see after that. So this is the kind of the political capital that Joe Biden has probably invested in it. And I'm not even going to go to the 2024 thing and stuff like that. That's a big deal, of course. We don't know whether Trump is running or not. He says he does. There's a lot of confusion with regards to that. But the political capital that Biden has invested on his personal self, his legacy would be Ukraine. Right? He's probably not done anything else. And not just him. Remember the legacy of each one of these people down the line that have been talking about running around the world. If I may bring India into the picture, pointing a gun at India, be the right side of history, and this and that, is at stake. The political capital is at the end of it at stake. Who will hire these guys if they've been embarrassed in front of the entire country? The next 5, 7, 10 years, they'll be kind of kept away. Now, this personal political capital has had very bad impact, and that's something which is terrible. And I find that personal capital investment and to leave a personal legacy has actually taken up more in terms of a center stage as a priority for the Americans rather than anything else. This whole personal capital, as I told you, Ukrainians have been asked to push for a counter-offensive. Even now, I believe they are collecting certain forces next to Kherson. The last time they did that, they lost a lot of people. If this time they have to do it for American political victory, you can imagine what is the state of this war landing up to. Now, the arrogance, as I said before, of saying by the West, whatever we are saying is right. If it's printed in the in the Western newspapers, it is absolutely correct. Social media, if you say anything, as you know, I was careful with my words, you will be made to go away. There is no question. So this whole arrogance is difficult to control to a large extent. People are starting to talk about it. It is not something that is going to say. And I said before about Tulsi Gabbard, that she came out and said no. Now, interestingly, I'd also want to say one thing. The Russians have been using their cyber attacks very, very carefully and very nicely indeed. Liz Truss's phone, a little difficult with so many S's, was hacked, and its done message has gone around. I've done a video. If you want to just get into that particular subject, it's there. You can check it out. Now, I believe personally the main communication pattern between US and UK, or probably the UK, was to a large extent compromised. A lot of communication went out, and that's, I guess, the reason why the defense secretary or the defense minister of UK ran to America to have a personal private meeting with his American counterparts. A lot of people say that it was because there was a compromise and they basically wanted to figure out how to do damage control. So, as events are coming out right now, and if more events of this sort come out, where the Americans are starting to kind of pull back, one has to understand that that particular meeting with Ben Wallace and the Western, because it's UK and US who's kind of leading this entire bulwark into the game, that particular meeting will become pretty significant to kind of remember. Now, in order to save face, I don't know if I'm using the right word, the Americans, some digital security experts and some researchers, unconfirmed researchers, have alleged that Russian attempts have already started to interfere in the US congressional elections, which are supposed to be held on the 8th. Now, see, that's a very easy way of putting it things, and Americans are famous of it. They stole the election, they did this, they did that, even Trump did that. Now, if these guys are going to lose, they're going to do that. They did that in 2016 when they said, the Russia Gate scandal, if I may, to defeat Hillary Clinton because she was too strong and this and that. Okay, that's enough of this whole conspiracy theory. But that's what I want to talk about in terms of the American domestic politics. Let's look outside American domestic politics. France and Japan have continued buying oil. As a matter of fact, Japan is continuing with their stake in one of these Russian oil companies. They are threatened we'll give up and this and that. They're doing that. Hungary is already buying oil from Russia. The gas through Turkey, I don't know, it'll take some time, but probably that is going to happen. You see the European Union cracking up with Scholz running to, China, and French president being pretty unhappy about it. There's a crack money crack between the European Union, where Scholz and Macron had actually put down the Americans and said, you guys are selling us gas at a much higher price than what you guys sell to your own markets and stuff like that. So there's a bit of a crack in the international community as well, because of course, you can't just hold it together for that long if your own janta is kind of going to start suffering. It's starting to get a bit cold in Ukraine. It's getting a bit cold in India as well. So one can only imagine in those areas, it's going to start getting cold in Europe, Ukraine and all that. So the times are going to change. Another fact I want to talk about is this phrase called Ukraine fatigue. Now, Ukraine fatigue has been talked about multiple times. This was recently mentioned by the wife of President Zelensky. Her name is Zelenska. Now, she says that because of the long drawn out nature of this war, which has impacted a lot of people and this and that, people have, grown kind of sick of it. Uh, of course, the fatigue is also, and she didn't say it, I'm adding it into it, that it is also mainly not because of the time and this and that. It is about the socio-economic balance which Europeans have lost, right? Sorry. There are gas prices problems in America. It's very clear. Some people, there was a meme that I was watching where, beginning of 2021, gas was at $2, and now it's no, gas means fuel in America was at $2, now it's $4.50 or something like that. So socio-economic balance has taken a hit. Interest rates have gone up, mortgages have gone up, trade has fallen down, people have lost jobs, and it creates a lot of problem. When the Afghanistan war was being fought by the Americans and the Iraq war was being fought, yeah, people were pissed off about why war and this and that. But these wars didn't affect the standard of living within Europe or America. This particular war, this particular proxy war, is affecting the standard of living. Now, when your factory shut down, your taxes, people lose jobs. When people lose jobs, their taxes go down. When taxes go down, the government's collection goes down. And when that happens, how is a government which is, these socially beneficial governments of the Nordic states and Germany and all that supposed to pay for free education, free this, free that, free this, and they've got this cradle to the grave structure. How do they pay for that? So personal monetary setbacks means a lot. It's very very critical to understand. Um, One has to realize that it's not just politics of the United States. It's the deteriorating situation around the world and within the United States itself. Of course, the Democrats, at all hints that are coming across, are going to lose this midterms. It's going to be a, I don't know what sort of a government. It's going to be lame. I mean, it's going to be crazy. Now, very very simple factor that one thing that we now realize is because of this domestic pressure from each one of these countries is kind of going at it their own way. As I mentioned about France and Japan kind of buying Russian oil, Germany going to China, Americans, I don't know how much, and this is not being spoken about, whether the Americans have actually discussed this with the European Union with regards to a negotiated settlement. Because today, the Prime Minister of Estonia, if I'm not mistaken, had put out that we need to destroy Russia and this and that. These little states right on the border of Russia are a little over enthusiastic about this whole thing. I think they've got the Polish wind going in there, which is making them a little more aggressive. Uh, it is it's a scenario where probably the Americans are trying to push out an off ramp and try and see whether the Russians get onto it. But how do you think the Russians are supposed to get onto it when they've been massive provocations like the Nord Stream pipeline attack, the Crimea bridge attack, the Russian fleet attack, which the Russians have said, boss, we know for the factor that the Britishers were involved. And the Britishers have this tradition. In all honesty, they're damn good at it. Behind enemy lines and creating this whole, you remember the Chindits during the Second World War? They did this whole operation behind enemy lines in France. So they have this whole James Bond gung ho sort of a thing, and a lot of people, a lot of analysts have actually said that the British Navy, backed by the Americans, of course, would have the capability of conducting these kind of attacks. There are rumors that the Russians have actually captured one of these drones that was supposed to go and hit the Russian fleet. So and they know what it is. So they've not put out all this stuff, but of course these are Russian reports which are coming out. Now, how far are they true? Something that we'll have to wait and watch. Now, there's one thing that all these guys, I don't know, nobody talks about is the validity of Ukraine as a state. Let's say the war, for example, hypothetically, the war stops today. Right? The validity of the Ukrainian state will be what? Will the West continue giving so much money to the Ukrainians to rebuild their society, knowing very well that they're not going to get mileage out of it because it's not that much news and the trend will drop? It's hard to understand. You know, it's also the factor that the Ukraine war has been connected to the national security interest of America. So when it's the national security interest of America, what does it have to do with the people of Ukraine is something that the Americans and the Western powers have left it to the source of imagination. It's something which is very, very interesting. The people of Ukraine is only referred to when there are attacks. Oh, they are suffering, they're this, they're that. But at the end of it, they know very well that the suffering is because the war is going on, right? If you keep piling in weapons, the war will continue going on. And there will be retaliations. What kind of a structure will Ukraine have as a viable existing state? We talk about fatigue. I mean, the Ukrainian forces have been on the front line for 8 months, 9 months, so probably without breaks. It's going to be very difficult. Now, another thing that we must talk about is the amount of weapons that have gone into Ukraine. You can talk about negotiations, but is the United States going to be doing anything to retrieve those weapons back? Of course, you've said our weapons inspectors are there. We will kind of, we are keeping a track and this and that. This is probably just building up to a narrative again. Weapons inspectors are there. We are asking for negotiations. No, we pulled out all the weapons. It's not like Afghanistan and this and that. But we know for a fact these weapons have landed up in Germany under the black market. They've been caught. Stinger missiles have been caught. I mean, I, for one, would be a little scared landing in Lufthansa. In Germany right now, it's going to be, these guys have, I mean, although everybody blames the whole plane crash which happened in Ukraine as a Russian this thing, but there are other people who say it wasn't Russians. It was one of these American missiles that actually shot it down. I don't know. I mean, this is something that I'm just speculating, if I may. What does Ukraine do about the whole infrastructure that is created for war? The whole narrative of Ukraine itself. US can literally say, okay, Ukraine, go and negotiate. How does Ukraine kind of take it forward? We know there is a certain right wing, extreme right wing sector in Ukraine. Do you think those guys will accept it? The centrist part of it, let's say for a minute, let's kind of hypoanalyze that Zelensky is some sort of a centrist. They won't spare him. It will not work. And what will you have? You'll have another set of guerrilla warfare that will happen, which will end up into another war. It's insane that if negotiations are being talked about, and on the other hand, you're kind of pushing the main partners that boss, don't take anything for granted, don't negotiate, don't this thing, you hit hard, the Russians are devils and this and that and the other. You can't just bring the whole game down right from 300 feet up right down to zero. It's going to have backlashes. The war will never get over in this particular way. The Ukrainians one fine day will realize that boss, till now our lives were valuable and everybody was talking about us. Just because the war is stopped now, everybody's gone away. There are no media channels, there's no reporting, there is no Slava Ukraini and all that stuff happening. Kya ho gaya bhai? That's going to be a big hit for them as people. And a war which has not come to its any particular conclusion in any way. I mean, not the Ukrainian way, not the Russian way, will not end just like that. It's going to be a festering wound. So you've brought a war to a point where it has been escalating. Now suddenly you put out a statement that let's negotiate, and telling Ukraine to do it on top of it, where the Americans should have actually led this particular thing, is something which is beside me. See, the only factor that I can see is the Americans kind of trying to put out a news and seeing what the public reaction is going to be. And the reaction, I'm sure they will get on the 8th. So as I said, it's not just the elections. There are a lot of other things which are coming into place. And the Americans till now have taken very, very funny steps, very irrational steps, going from one corner to the other. And this is another example of it. The last thing I want to talk about is the coalition of the willing. Now, the coalition of the willing is supposed to be a group of nations who will give a certain amount of their forces to go inside Western Ukraine and kind of occupy it under the flag of peacekeeping. I don't know what these guys are smoking. Are they going to tell the Russians when they fire missiles? I mean, the Russians, they're going to fire missiles. And what if one of these guys die? What happens then? You start shooting at each other? What if the Russians overpower you? You throw nuclear weapons? And where does that take you? So, for a personal political capital to create a personal legacy, look what the world has come down to be. Of course, it's not one person's legacy; it's the legacy of a whole series of people. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm not wanting to kind of get into that cabal sort of a situation. We know this gang of people that are behind all this stuff, right? It's known as the globalists, who control a lot of things. Now, for that personal thing, we've brought this entire game to this, and who's the loser at the end of it? The Russians have lost? No, I don't think so. Their economy is fine. Their people are actually enraged, let me tell you, and not with the Russian president. They're enraged with the West. They taste blood right now. Putin asked for 300,000 soldiers. 320,000 soldiers have got this thing, and there are another 70 or 80,000 soldiers that are getting trained furthermore. And if rumors are supposed to be believed, I don't think the mobilization has been put off. So by the end of December, they'll have more than 1 million men. Now it's difficult for me to do this, but to corroborate what I'm saying. But I'm telling you this because I was reading some of the Russian media where it's amazing how detailed the Russian army analysts and military analysts actually talk about these things. They're talking about this pretty openly in the media. It's damn difficult to decipher because you've got to, CC and the closed captions kind of mess it up, but it is what it is. So you're talking about a coalition of the willing which will escalate this war. On the second hand, you're telling Ukraine, beta to baat kar le, uske saath khatam kar isko. Which way are you going? What is the strategy of this apart from just the statement Lloyd Austin had mentioned? So the whole political divide within USA is landing up a country into chaos. That is the bottom line. The bottom line is that the personal legacy of a particular group of individuals is going to lead the world into the position that we are in. There is nothing else to it. And this, whatever it is, are desperate ways of getting attention and desperate ways of ensuring something comes their way. So that's what I wanted to say. And it's a sad state of affairs because I wanted to try and put together a lot of things which are happening. At the instance, everybody would obviously say the elections. I want to say it's elections. The pressures within the EU, the resistance from the global south, the diplomatic losses that the Americans have gone through, India, China, the issues which are building up with the North Koreans today. There's a whole lot which is happening in the world which is going to split the attention of the Americans, and the amount of focus that they would be able to put into Ukraine is going to reduce day by day. If the Americans induce a war, so can the Russians. Remember that. And of course, we should also keep a track of Serbia and Kosovo. There's a bit of tension starting up there. Remember, both the Russians and the Americans are involved. Kosovo is manned quite a lot by the Americans even today. So there's a lot which is happening around, which we need to kind of understand. And as far as India is concerned, we need to understand this stuff can happen to us. Not, of course, the hot war situation, but this whole narrative attack could come our way anytime. It did come our way till the time EAM Jaishankar went off and started lighting fires under everybody. But till that time, a lot of people felt that we were under pressure. Right? So let me just go through what comments and questions or suggestions or anything else or observations that you guys have put up. Let's see what you guys have to say. Of course, Mr. Mandar, thank you so much for being the first one to review. Before I read the question, guys, like, subscribe, bell icons, and yes, of course, please do join up as a member. It's going to be great help towards me. And of course, otherwise, you can always do a super chat or a super sticker. And yes, visit the website. Please check out the website. It's been categorized into all old videos under subjects and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting. Right, the pressure by the EU Republican victory being predicted and the American disinterest to fight with boots on the ground. Yeah, absolutely. The Americans are disinterested, but I don't know how many of these politicians are, Bandar, because they the coalition of willing is something which is a little insane to me. And there are countries in Europe which would kind of readily do that. And I'd covered this in my video where I'd shown you guys what are the different spaces where Ukraine is kind of made up of and who all countries have a certain kind of claim on it. So there's just so much more in this entire game which the Americans have pre-focused into a centrist sort of a game that Putin is bad, Putin is devil, the Russians are this, Russians are that. That's why poor Ukrainians are suffering. So that's the, in a simple nutshell, which has been created. Yes, winter is coming, Vishal. There's no question about it. Sir, do you think this conflict will fracture the NATO fundamentally as the European nations again recognizing US as just benefiting from all these conflicts? Sir, EU has always recognized and known the factor that US benefits from this. But bolega kaun? Remember, EU benefits quite a bit from American presence in Europe because EU countries barely spend anything on their own defense. Look at the German defense forces, hardly anything. I mean, the French have great technology, but their forces are very small and they're engaged mostly in Africa, right? So the Americans provide for a huge support structure for them in terms of the security for their perceived threat from Russia. So EU does know what the game is, but that's how it is. You gotta kind of stick by for you gotta do two wrong things to get a right done for yourself, probably. But the whole factor is this time there's no right happening. They've lost, lost, and lost. Are you saying that the Democratic Party no longer has moral authority to negotiate with the Russians? I don't know if you would term it as moral authority. I would term it as a personal kind of, you know, somebody who you've kind of named names, devil, killer, murderer. How will you sit in the same room? Will that guy take you seriously or just brush you off? It's if serious negotiations are supposed to happen, remember what happened to Joe Biden when he went to Saudi Arabia, right? So Putin is a little more harder than that. So guess the Republicans have literally taken this Ukraine support narrative by painting it red. Literally, to them, it's benefiting slowly with Biden losing ground rapidly. Yes, absolutely. But let me tell you, Republicans are also no less. Huh? There is the older setup of McConnell and all these guys had approved this entire aid of 40-50 billion dollars. Whatever the Americans have sent till now has, the Americans have, by the way, spent twice the amount as the Europeans have spent. So there also Europeans have benefited. You can imagine. The Europeans have not spent as much money as the Americans have. Europeans have not sent in, and there's been a lot of criticism about Germany not sending these arms to uh, kind of Ukraine on time. And I think the ex-German ambassador had called Chancellor Olaf Scholz a slump liver sausage. So yeah, there's Europeans have benefited quite a bit. They're smart people, if I may. Not as smart as keeping themselves warm, but anyways. I think the whole Ukraine affair has nothing to do with Russia, but has everything to do with China. Look at what Biden has done after coming to office. Left Afghanistan as if they left the battlefield. Your second message says, then start a war with Russia also so it's neutralized and so that it won't help China when USA goes to China. That's why Pelosi. I'd buy the factor of this thing, but I personally buy one factor that there is a dual containment plan. I've put out a video also. This me and General Shankar have discussed this, where look at both the situations where the Russians are fighting a war on their doorstep, so are the Chinese. The Americans are far away, protected. So it's kind of a way to keep the two big dogs occupied, so that you can rule the world. Uh, it's gone right, gone wrong. Yes, we'll have to see. But one of the things that we'll have to figure out about China is the factor that China there's still a lot of economic linkages, and I don't know if Biden would want to do the same mistake as to cut off themselves completely, because that's going to be the first Chinese reaction. And yeah, you're right. At the end of it is the Russia-China angle, but I don't buy the Russia-China, friendship and this whole thing. It's basically a game of अभी ठीक है दोस्त बन जाते हैं. As far as Pelosi's trip to Taiwan, dude, I mean, there's a lot to be done for a personal legacy also. So remember, these are politicians and these are paid politicians who want to go out on a high. So you never know what's happening. Probably she realized that they're going to lose this election, so she was the one who kind of instigated the Taiwan crisis, and she retired after that or whatever. What's the future of Mr. Sonak? Action seems to be selected by the left cabal. Sir, I said this. Please check out my video, Kiran Saab. I have said this. Even if he's not being selected, he's been termed as a globalist, right? And globalist, elitist cabal, and all that stuff. That's the whole game. And today there was a funny video that's going around where they were burning these guys' effigies and stuff like that in UK. So it's a funny situation. Plus, understand one thing. Let's be clear. He's an Indian. Need I say more? Right? This whole administration is all about taking care of China problem. That's why the deep state has put out such a dementia candidate as a president, so that the deep state can operate with a free hand. Sir, China problem for them is, yes, a problem, but that's a problem that they can't deal with alone, right? So they'll need people, because remember the proximity of the United States from China. So if there's a war, how to keep yourself supplied? They've got bases and stuff like that, but see the legs of communication. So you need people around to kind of support you, and this war is kind of contradictory to that particular support, because you're going to start losing alliances if the economic situation falls and the whole lot of other things. This whole narrative goes sideways. Of course, I'm sure there'll be a lot of calls coming to India with regards to pacifying India with, trying to ensure that things don't go bad. But there is a public sentiment, of course, which are which is against the US today in India as well. A lot of people are not very happy with what they've done. The Germans are pressuring the PM not to go for war and negotiate with Russia. Sir, Germans have, you know, been protesting, and it's not being covered. They've been protesting and protesting and protesting. It is there is something known as Not My War, which they've put up. They've done a lot of protests. Uh, they won't cover them in the mainstream media, and it's sad. There's no question about it. But this is how it is. I mean, Germans are under a lot of pressure. And that's why Olaf Scholz has gone running to China. Of course, when a stake is bought, there's a lot of forex will come into the country and will help him out. His gas reserves are full right now, but remember one thing: gas reserves might be full right now, but when the usage starts, the gas reserve starts falling, and with the available demand, the prices get increased. So it's when it's full, the prices are going to be less. The minute the damn thing starts getting consumed, the prices will start going up, because it's a balance of demand and supply. So that's going to be interesting to watch. They can cheer for joy right now, but it's not for long. Venki sir, thank you so much. Wonder why the world or the Russia has not raised the deployment of an airborne division, weapons audit inspection preposterous. Sir, the Russians have said it. Russians have been saying that you guys are on the ground. Uh, I personally feel the Americans have come out and said it because of this whole communications uh, crack that probably the Russians have done, and they've been able to pick out a lot of things that would have embarrassed the Americans. Now, instead of getting embarrassed in the world stage, you come out and put out a story. No, 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 they're inspecting weapons and this and that. As if the Americans are really bothered where these damn weapons are going. Mandar Saab, you say Americans are now scared of the losing to the petrodollar. Petrodollar is still pretty strong. There is no question about it. You have hinted to something very interesting about de-dollarization. Uh, a lot of economists are still studying it. I personally feel it's not something that's going to happen overnight. Uh, Even today, India has about $532 billion. Today, I think $6.84 billion went up in terms of the reserves. India has been diversifying a little bit into gold and a little bit into euros and some other currencies which were required. I mean, so that's there, but it's going to take time. What you're saying is right. There's been a unless and until the next government, which is the Republicans, they create a whole sense of trust factor with the rest of the world. This is inevitable. There's no question about it. Right? Mighty Saab says Biden's, Obama, and the Clintons. Yes, you hit nail on the head. There's no question. We see them together even now. They're all buying oil from Russia. What are they sticking on us for not buying on Russia? What's the logic behind this? Still, they think they're great. Logic is nothing, sir. It is, as I can't say it better than Mr. Jaishankar said it, that Europe needs to understand when it's uh, they feel that when it's your problem, it's not my problem, but when it's my problem, it is your problem. So that's how it is. And till now, of course, they expected India to kind of toe the line because they've taken India into, oh, it's a Western partner. You've got your Quad and I2U2 and this and that and G7+1. So they expected India to kind of toe the line of the West, which didn't happen. So that's something that they came to a shock. Of course, there had to be a cost for that. So that's okay. That's fine. Right. Abba. Nice name. There used to be a band called ABBA. I mean, my dad used to love that at one time. It is Russia that started the war. Nobody else can be blamed. Fair enough, sir. Thank you so much. And you say Russia destroyed his own pipeline and blamed the West. Fair enough. And I'm going to put out these comments. Okay, I may not agree with him, but that's his opinion. This is a free show of you can you can pretty much say whatever that comes to you. Russian tax money from oil revenues will be used to rebuild Ukraine. Fair enough, sir. I don't know how you will plan to do that, but because the Russian tax revenues were going to be with Russia. Uh, if you're referring to the $300 billion that have been by force kept by the West, uh, that is thievery. So, no matter what you say, and that, if it's done, will result, as Mandar mentioned it about de-dollarization. If you do stuff like that, would you want to keep your money in the West? No, you kind of take it out. I'm not going to go and comment about the pipeline and started the war and this and that. I've talked about it enough, and I think that's his opinion, and I respect that. Maybe people are desperate in has a fighting themselves to make up the supreme slot there. That's why foolish decisions are taken due to lack of coordination between them. Just thinking. People in the deep state have an infighting. You don't get into the deep state if you have infighting. These are people who will not spare you if you go out of line. Let me put that across very clearly. So the deep state probably thought of it in a way that they realized that there won't be a backlash and they would be able to kind of handle it. And this has not been happening from now. This has been happening. It's called the containing Russia policy. I mentioned it before. It was written in a book by Leonard Brzezinski in the 1970s, where he had said that Russia needs to be, and let me say this, broken up into small states, the same thing that they talk about today. There's also a study that was done by the Rand Institute, which talks about how Ukraine could be used to control and curtail Russian activity within Eastern Europe. So this is something that has been there, and of course, the kind of sanctions that have been imposed could have been different, but they've not thought about it. You, in that sense, I think you're absolutely right. Foolish is probably the bottom line. Another theory: Europeans want a freer hand in foreign policy, so plan to use winter crisis to get more leverage from the Americans. Well, the French do that, sir. So there's, of course, there's some theory to what you're saying. The French do that quite a bit. They don't like interference. Their nuclear policy is their own nuclear policy. Well, the British have this link with the Americans. The French don't. They have their own foreign policy structure. They don't share their nuclear weapons even for these testings and all that stuff, or these exercises. They've got their own air force and this and that, their own technology. They don't share it with the rest of the Europeans. And there have been clashes about this with the French and the Europeans before. So yeah, I mean, of course, the French would try and do that, but Macron today is not on a strong footing. If he has indeed dissolved the parliament, that's going to be a trial on his side to try and see if he can get the strength in the parliament so that he doesn't have that much resistance when he takes hard calls of probably lifting sanctions from Russia, or I don't know. The Japanese have already broken the rules to a large extent, but you don't see a op-ed written about Japan in Wall Street Journal and this and that. No, you don't. It's India. India special. Remember that always. Rhinos within the Republican Party, like Lindsey Graham, are more closer to the Democrats when it comes to hostility. Oh yeah, absolutely. With Russia and making money for themselves, there's no question, sir. I mentioned McConnell also, and many of the older, these guys are pretty, anti-Russian. They come from that age of um, the Cold War, and being against the Soviet Union and stuff like that. Yes, I thank you, Mr. Arun, for putting this thing out. It's a beautiful book. If you can, please do read it. Uh, it's I something I had read about, I think 5, 7, 8 years ago. I vaguely remember the plot of it, but I know the gist what he's talking about, and it is basically terms at splitting the Russian Federation into small unions, which was tried to be done during the fall of the Soviet Union. So thanks, Arun. Thanks so much, for putting this across. Last two comments. If we really want to protect ourselves from the West and USA, we need to start de-dollarization and building up our own social media ecosystem to cooperate with everyone, even with China. Well, of course, we need to sort out stuff with China. In the long term, of course, China also understands this feud with India is not going to be beneficial for himself, because if his war is going to be in the east, this is a second front for him. Remember that, and that's going to be like we have this fear. If we are fighting a war with China, there's Pakistan will suddenly come inside. They also would have that fear from us today. So yeah, that is there, but de-dollarization is going to be difficult, because understand the world works on dollar. India has been kind of trying to uh, do its own trade with its own local currency, its own Indian rupee with various different countries. The UPI has gone to various different places. So it's a step in the right direction, but it'll take time. But the biggest thing is Atmanirbharta. There's no question about it. We need to be self-sufficient and self-reliant, especially with regards to energy. You cannot be in a place like Europe today where you are being sold gas 5 times more costly than what it is. Right. And last comment by Mr. Mandar. Oh, no, sorry, I missed one more, so I'm going to take that up. Manika's World Island geopolitics theory calls for the breakup of Russia. Yeah, exactly. That's one of another thing. Thanks for reminding me. These are theories that have been written, and these so-called think tanks and all that do development studies on this, where they discuss how these theories could be put into action going forward. What are the steps that they can take? What are the risks? This Rand study is very interesting. It's a long book, so it's about 250, 300 pages, if I'm not mistaken. But it gives you an insight on how this entire game actually works. Many MPs in EU Parliament hitting all these propagandas against globalists. Yes, Mark Wallace is one of these chaps. I'm trying to get him to do a talk with me. Difficult man to get in touch with. But absolutely, this is being spoken about by another lady. I'm forgetting her name, who would stand up in the European Parliament and give it back really hard. So it's there's no question there people understand what is happening. Even in the US, you saw the protest and the heckling that Barack Obama went through. So it's not isolated, right? It's not isolated at all. So that's what it is. Mr. Bala, thank you so much. Where you say late night pearls of wisdom, thank you so much for the kind words. It's nice when you say that. And as a last note, I also want to say, guys, it's I try to keep this channel as factual as possible. I do a lot of research in terms of putting out facts, in terms of getting the right stuff, which could be verified by yourself and putting it out to you. I don't like talking about michi masala. It's not something which I do. I'd like to. Geopolitics is a very serious game, and I want to keep it that way. I have noticed there are certain individuals, and I don't want to name them, but they are using a lot of my thought processes, which I painstakingly put a lot of time and effort in studying, into their own videos and making a very mirchi masala sort of a thing. I can't do much about it, but in one way, it makes me feel happy that I am kind of doing the research for some of the biggest people in India who are trying to do that. Of course, there are a lot of great speakers that come into my channel who've helped me grow over the years, over the past 2 years, where they've taught me a lot of things, and I owe a lot of gratitude to all of my speakers, General Shankar, General Ryan, General Dua, General Atasnen, General Bhatia, so many, General Shaukin Chauhan, who over the years, General Dushan Singh, and apologies for missing out anyone. They've guided me to where I am today and taught me how to research. So there's a lot of research that I put into my material, and there's a lot of thought that I put into my material where I am ready to back what I'm trying to say. Those of you part of my Dev Talk group would also realize that there are times I've put across a certain news, and the corroboration of that particular news has come out after some time. Like, I personally feel that the entire story in Pakistan is being done to create a scenario of a martial law. I don't know whether that's going to come true, but this is something that I analyze. Okay, analysis is a hit and run, hit and go sort of a thing. But what happens is original analysis remains as original, and the other one I'd rather not say anymore. Thank you so much for joining me. And I think some of you, Mandar and Venki Saab, and all of you know what I'm talking about. But, anyways, that's all I wanted to say. And I want to put it out politely that I'm happy that things are being used. And it's great that these very big people and very big analysts agree with what I'm saying. So it gives me more legitimacy. And I'm happy about that. Before I sign off, guys, like the video, help me reach a larger audience so that I can do more and I can do better. Subscribe, check your bell icons. Very, very critical, guys. Write comments, write your thoughts within the comment section, especially to all the guys on the WhatsApp Dev Talks WhatsApp group. Please, please, please like this video. Tell your friends, and if you can, just influence a like, because it really helps me grow as a channel. And I want to be able to reach a larger audience so that we can have more factual discussions about stuff. You can contribute to the Dev Talks efforts by clicking the join button, or just sending a super sticker or a super chat by clicking thanks, or you can directly contribute to me on the UPI mentioned on your screen. Till next time, tomorrow, for another set of shows, another topic, another setup, and another whole discussion. Thank you, Venki sir, for your contribution of the super sticker. And another whole set of discussion with another set of parameters. This week is going to be interesting. I'm going to be talking a little bit about history, which sadly got cancelled today because General Bhatia was not well. We will cover Operation Cactus. We will go forward with the 1962 war. We'll probably do a small Ukraine update by the end of this week, because trying to see what's going to happen post this election is going to be interesting. Till next time, guys. Jai Hind.